What's actually more important is having that longer term vision for what you want your company to be and applying that backwards to the customer feedback. So you have to translate those things over and say, okay, what's the answer? What would satisfy this thing the customer is asking for while meeting that longer term vision? Early on, you're really kind of looking at it like what's happening this month and what's happening in 6 years, right? This like huge separation of distance, right? Anything in between that's fuzzy. And if you make the mistake of working on things that will take you a month or 2 months to do, you're going to lose that attention from your customers. You're going to lose that beginning of excitement, and you're going to miss the mark. My name's John Egan. I'm a co-founder and CEO at Kintaba.
This is Code Story, a podcast bringing you interviews with tech visionaries who share in the critical moments of what it takes to change an industry and build and lead a team that has your back. I'm your host, Noah Lampart, and today how John Egan set out to create the platform to bring order to the chaos of incident response. All this and more on Code Story. John Egan is a computer and electrical engineer by training. Early on, he got disillusioned by the idea of building robots because it was too slow for him. While he was working at Harvard, he was watching the early days of Y Combinator and told his wife that there was a movement going on and they should move to be a part of it. Startups weren't common then, so it was a risky move. But John found himself excited about being a part of it. Eventually, they did make the move, created a file transfer company, and ended up getting acquired by Facebook. Outside of tech, he's married with a 4-year-old son. And for fun, he builds tools for himself, since he's not writing much code at his current venture. One of them is postmortem.io, in addition to launching IRConf for incident responders. Post-Facebook, John set out to ask the question to his prior colleagues that had left about the tools that they missed the most. The tool that kept coming up in conversation was a tool to manage incidents. So he decided to build this platform, named after an ancient Japanese philosophy. This is the creation story of Kintaba.
So Kintaba is an incident management and response platform. So there's a trend that's kind of taken hold back around like 2016 when Google published the SRE handbook. They published this for free. And they, for the first time, really outlined what their approach was internally to dealing with critical emergencies at the company. And this was really impactful because, right, every company is always on fire. I'm sure you do these interviews, you must hear from people every day talking about troubles, not just their successes. But it's only recent history that companies have really started to adopt a set of best practices for what to do when things go badly. The old world really looked like saying, well, our goal is not to have incidents, or there won't be incidents, or we're trying to knock them down to as little as possible. That moment in 2016 was really powerful because it made everyone look at one of the most successful companies in the world, Google, and say, oh, they actually are expecting these things to continue to happen forever. They're not planning for incident zero. And this was something that I saw firsthand at Facebook as well. Facebook also adopted incident management really aggressively internally. And it actually sort of made me think that that was the standard. I kind of, working at Facebook out of a startup, you think, okay, at the startup we were on fire and Facebook's more like everyone else. They have a plan for these things. They have a whole process in place. And they've learned these processes from places like fire departments, from like the DoD, from like places that are really dealing with fires all the time, from the airline industry where a fire means loss of life. And so when I left Facebook back in about 2017, 2018, we went to all of our friends who had also left over the years and had gone to other unicorn startups and other companies, and we talked to them a lot about what were the tools that they missed. And the one that kept coming up was an internal tool at Facebook that managed incidents. And this was really an orchestration tool that was all about giving you access to the administrative overhead and process for dealing with an incident across the company. And critically, it was available to the entire organization. This wasn't an SRE tool. This wasn't a engineering tool. This was something that anyone in the company at any moment could say, well, what's on fire? And if there was something on fire, either be a responder and help and know where the conversation was happening for that resolution, be an observer and learn without having to send a bunch of emails out to everyone's managers saying, what's going on? Why are things bad? And then learn on the output of when an incident is resolved, what are the changes we're making systemically, day to day, week to week, as we learn from these outages to make sure they don't happen again, to become more powerful. And that's what Kintaba is really meant to be and where it's born from. It's this. It's actually derived from the word kintsugi, which is a Japanese art form where you take broken pottery and you put it back together with golden inlay, and then it becomes more valuable because of it. It's an entire art form. You can actually go buy kintsugi art, online. And it was this beautiful imagery to me, right? Which is this idea that you're actually stronger for your scars. And that's what tools and processes that care about incident management are. They take into account the idea that each one of these major incidents is an opportunity for your company to become stronger and more resilient, and you're going to be better than your competition. What Kintaba really is it's a dashboard for all of your major fires that are happening and have happened in the past. And then it's a process orchestrator for making sure that the way you respond to these outages is consistent. Where do you go to have the conversation? Who are the people responding? What are their roles? How are those roles being assigned? Like, where are the postmortems getting written? How do we make sure they get written? All of that lives inside of Kintaba. And the goal was, let's just provide this as an off-the-shelf solution so that every company, 3 people, 3,000 people, 30,000 people, can get the same kind of tooling value that these big FANG companies are getting by building it for themselves. And that was really the genesis, and it sort of took off from there.
Well, tell me about the MVP. So that first product you built, how long did it take you to build, and what sort of tools did you use to bring it to life?
So the initial thought was that the core of the product was going to be the dashboard and a collaboration space. Where do you go when the incident happens? And so those were the first 2 things we built, which, looking back, maybe that's a bit difficult to go and say, okay, great, let's go build a full chat interface. That's the MVP. Sometimes I look back and I think, wow, that was a bit of a high bar just to get out of the gate. But it was actually pretty important, that was the bar coming out of the gate, because we really wanted Kintaba to be a little bit different from just a record-keeping solution. We wanted it to be a real-time solution. It's the place you go and the place you work the problem, not just the place you go after the fact. And so it's pretty important for us that we come up with some approach to the collaborative interface. We just come off of another project we were working on that was more in the blockchain space, and learned a lot about how we were going to do, resilient and functional coding going forward. And I think Kintaba is primarily based on Node and Next.js, and then backed by Kubernetes. So really the infrastructure for us gets to be very hands-off, right? It's a very self-sufficient, inherently resilient product from the bottom up. And a lot of the MVP had to do with that. It had to do with, how do we do this as 3 people in a way that can make the company look like it's 100? And as soon as that started to work, we really started to shop it around aggressively. In the past, I'd built products and, we always said, we'll give it away, for a year or 2 and work with people. And with Kintaba, we really said that we need to charge on day 1. The MVP has to be valuable on day 1, or else this space isn't real. Because it's one of those spaces where people will never disagree with you when you talk to them about it. You'll never go up to someone who builds a company or works in a company and say, wouldn't it be great if it was easy to put your fires out? The real test there, right, this is kind of a standard with SaaS products. The real test is, well, will you write me a check, of any amount of money, even $1, $5, $10, to come and use this product? And so the MVP was really those 2 things. It was just the dashboard, an ability to create a new incident, and then a place to come in and collaborate. So you can imagine where it grew from there, right? We immediately had to go connect it to Slack, because that's where people actually collaborate, and et cetera, et cetera. But the MVP was that. It was very much those 2 pieces, web only. I think we had some integrations with Twilio to do notifications out over email and SMS to make sure we could attract responders, at the right moment. And then we went searching for customers.
With any MVP, you got to make certain decisions and trade-offs. Tell me about those decisions and trade-offs you had to make in how you built it, and what, features you were going to start with or cut, technical debt, anything like that, and how you coped with those decisions.
There was so much we wanted in the MVP, which we're really just getting to the point of having. Incident response being an effective, what I keep calling it, an orchestration system, really means automations. It means on-call roles and handoffs. It means post-mortem documents and notifications and emails going out with calendars. It means all of these things. And so, when we came out of the gate, we wanted all of these features, and burning it down to just a couple of items really looked like trying to stack rank them, both from a standpoint of difficulty as well as a standpoint of critical insight that it would give us, right? What are we learning by building each of these features? And we had to be careful not to build features that were reliant on other features, right? Because that's meaningless when you're building an MVP. You need to know if the first level features work. Very much your 0 to 1. And so the decision around the dashboard was obvious, because we wanted Kintaba to be a whole company product. And the thing that makes something a whole company product really is that dashboard, so that even if you're not a participant in incident response, we wanted to make sure that, frontline salesperson, PR, marketing, CEO, everyone could go in and see what was happening. That was priority number one. So that easily made the cut. The chat interface was a tougher decision. It was really weighing that versus having sort of a structured data input space, right? Where we just say, oh, maybe we'll just capture the data, right? We'll just give you a bunch of form fields to fill out, which is actually what a lot of other products kind of looked like that were coming into this space at the time. And we ultimately decided against it because of that point I made earlier, which was we really wanted the space to be alive. We wanted it to be the space that people go and interact, not just the space you go after the fact. And secondarily, we kind of walked through our values. And one of the really important ones was we wanted the barrier to filing incidents to be as low as possible, right? In the current world, in the non-tooled world, if you have an incident response process, it probably looks like a wiki page. And it's probably a really scary wiki page, right? It's or a Notion doc. It's like, here's the 500 steps we follow when we have a major incident, right? Terrifying stuff. And when your incident response product looks like a bunch of structured data, it's very similar to that. It's like, here's all the things you're going to fill out if you file an incident. And the natural reaction to that is, I don't want to file an incident, right? I don't want these things in here. But the reality of the space and what we learned, at Facebook and what Google knows and Netflix knows is that you actually want as many of these things as possible getting filed, because then you'll catch them sooner because your barrier is lower. You'll catch them at the Sev 3 and the Sev 2 level instead of waiting until your entire site's gone down and your whole business is at risk. And so we sort of made that decision straight out of the gate on the MVP. We said, okay, we're just going to do it. We're going to go build a collaborative space. We're going to make sure all the conversation information is logged, and then we're going to be able to benefit from that farther down the road in terms of capturing important moments and making sure they're pushed into the postmortem. And we're going to benefit from that by giving people an easier to use, more familiar experience. In fact, when we launched the MVP and TechCrunch picked it up, the first piece of sort of backhanded compliment we got on Hacker News was, wow, this visually kind of looks like Facebook or something. And we took that as a compliment. We were like, good, it should feel like something that isn't scary. It shouldn't feel like, the tool you roll out to 3 or 4 SREs.
This episode is sponsored by Vanta. You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors. But they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. And that's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups like yours get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. How, you ask? Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. And the platform connects you with trusted vCISOs to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstars startups who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at vanta.com/codestory. That's VANTA.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by Kinsta. Between juggling client meetings, managing your website, and keeping up with everyday tasks, who has the time to stress out about website security? Well, with Kinsta, the technical stuff is taken care of, so you can focus on what you do best. Kinsta provides managed hosting for WordPress, offering lightning-fast load times, top-tier security, and unmatched human-only customer support. Whether you're a business owner, web developer, or running a digital agency, Kinsta makes managing your website easy and efficient. Kinsta provides enterprise-grade security, being one of the few hosting providers for WordPress with SOC 2 and other certifications, guaranteeing the highest level of security for your website. Thanks to their unlimited free expert-led migrations, Kinsta ensures a smooth transition for you from other hosting providers. Customers have reported 200% faster load times post-migration to their platform. What I find cool about Kinsta is their fast and reliable customer service and premium features that are included at no extra cost. Ready to experience Kinsta's hosting for yourself? Get your first month free when you sign up at kinsta.com today. That's KINSTA.com. So, okay, you've got your MVP, right? And how did you progress the product from there, and how did you mature it? And you kind of mentioned it earlier with the, okay, now you got to integrate it with Slack, right? But even further, and to give it a little more context, how did you build your roadmap, and how did you decide, okay, this is the next most important thing to build?
When you've got that first bit of product market fit and you've got your first customers and they start telling you what they want, right? Which they'll do. If you have any degree of product market fit, you're going to get this just avalanche of feedback from your customers. What's actually more important, I think, than having that short-term, roadmap built in stone is having that longer-term vision for what you want your company to be and applying that backwards to the customer feedback. It's actually a pretty difficult thing to do because customers will ask you for really specific things, right? They'll come in and they'll say, there's no way for me to put this piece of structured data in. Like, I want this piece of structured data. Can you add a field, right? And then you look at your long-term vision. So for example, for us, that long-term vision being we want entire organizations to be using Kintaba. We want everyone in the company to feel like it's an easy to use, comfortable experience. And we really don't like structured data because of that, right? We don't want to say, here are things that make it scary, or here are more input fields. So you have to translate those things over and say, okay, what's the answer? What would satisfy this thing the customer is asking for while meeting that longer term vision for what we want the company to become? And I think that really builds your short-term roadmap. You can actually kind of just put together lists of customer requests, map them to long-term company vision, and then equals short-term roadmap. Because you're going to be resource constrained early on, right? You're going to have more of a problem of what do you have to cut out than anything else. And so you've got to be really careful with those decisions. And early on, you're really kind of looking at it like what's happening this month and what's happening in 6 years, right? This huge separation of distance, right? Anything in between that's fuzzy because you're going to learn a lot over that period. And if you make the mistake of working on things that will take you a month or 2 months to do, you're going to lose that attention from your customers. You're going to lose that beginning of excitement, and you're going to miss the mark.
Well, let's switch to team then. So how did you go about building your team, and what did you look for in those people to indicate that they were the winning horses to join you?
So we started very small and we've stayed quite small, very purposefully. I believe really strongly in hiring people and working with people who punch way above their weight from a standpoint of the amount of product and effort they can put out day to day. And we do this without burnout. We're not a 24-hour working company. We're actually pretty strict around normal working hours. But, when you're picking things like co-founders, which is the first step to this, you're generally, looking for folks who are willing to really just roll with the changes that are going to happen. In a large organization, it's easy to get feedback, when you're trying to find your footing. And it's one of the reasons big companies have trouble kind of doing major pivots is the organization thinks it's pointed one way and gets really hooked on that. And then if you need to pivot inside of that because of new information, it's tough. It's kind of a hit against everyone who's on the team and who's working. Whereas in startups, that's just day to day. You're going to say, wow, this thing we've been putting the entire, week into is completely wrong. Burn the code. Let's go a different direction. So initially, that's kind of step one is folks who are really flexible. And Zach and Cole, my two co-founders, fit this bill perfectly. Zach and I ran a company together before, so we knew each other for a long time. Cole, we'd worked really closely with at Facebook. It was just a fantastic architect and really, really capable in terms of building like I'd mentioned earlier, infrastructure that punches above its weight class, that doesn't fall even though it has a limited number of people behind it. I think that's like step one. Step two then is hiring, and hiring is really hard. Hiring, you talk to most founders and they'll generally kind of give you the current state of their team, and they'll say, yeah, we've hired the best. And they won't often talk about all the trouble they had getting to the best. Most founders I talk to go through, series of hires and then, attrition immediately afterwards. And we've gone through similar, when we've tried to hire people in and fit them into the team and found that there's not a perfect fit or otherwise. Getting to where we are now, we're really just starting to find our footing, and we still work really heavily with contractors because of how much we value the flexibility of the folks who we work with in terms of, let's make sure this works really well. Let's make sure you're really on board. Let's make sure it's going to be the right fit before we'll kind of bring anyone on full time. So, that's really high level. It's kind of wishy-washy answer, but hiring in the early days is sort of wishy-washy. You're like 50% human relationship because you're going to have a very human relationship with these people. It's not going to be a manager-employee relationship. And then 50%, technical capability and drive and alignment with vision. And so testing for all of that is not a perfect science, unfortunately. And oftentimes you need to get the person in before you learn whether or not it's going to be the right person. And there are a bunch of old blog posts from startups where they had like hacky ways to do that. And a lot of those have kind of disappeared because it's questionable labor practices sometimes. Come in, do a bunch of work, and then, we don't hire you. We try not to do that. But yeah, that's sort of the approach we've generally taken is we look for, we really look for friends at this point, I think is the right way to describe it. You want to work with your friends. I think I'd mentioned to you off camera before this a little bit that running a startup during the pandemic is a much more isolating experience than historically running a startup has been. Historically, running a startup has been, we're all in a room together. Y Combinator used to be, you'd rent a room in Mountain View somewhere, and that was your office, that was your home. Those were the people you lived with, they were the people you cooked with. It was a little boiler room of these things. And nowadays it's not. Nowadays it's a Slack room of these individuals. And I actually think the way you hire is starting to change because of that as well.
Let's switch to scalability. And you answered this in your MVP answer, but I want to give it full space because I want to understand your approach. So did you build this to scale efficiently from day one, or are you fighting this as you grow and gain traction?
Kintaba has really been built for scale from day one. It was one of the things we did better with this startup than I think any other product or startup space I've worked in before. And it's really us standing on the shoulders of giants more than us being brilliant, right? The infrastructure that you build on, it's really become, almost consistent across companies. Like everyone's sort of building on the same stuff now. I remember when we built the first company, it was all a hodgepodge. I think Heroku had sort of just recently been acquired by Salesforce, if you want to do like timing. This was back in like 2013. And that was about the closest there was to sort of auto scalability. You were still kind of manually provisioning on AWS, and you were sort of managing your web servers. You were certainly managing your own security. These things were pretty scary. Whereas today, if you want to go and build a pretty reliable and resilient stack, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's reasonably well documented in terms of what you ought to go and build on. And we built, I think we chose some winners, partially because of our experience with them, but also partially because that was kind of what you could read online. But Node and Next are just fantastic front end experiences, and on the back end, Kubernetes has a huge community behind it. It's well supported. It was becoming even better supported at the time that we came onto it. I think Azure had just really started doing AKS successfully, which is what we're built on top of. And these things really just kind of give us auto scaling out of the box. And so our outages very rarely look like scaling problems, which I think is, in the old days, a lot of what our outages used to look like. The servers are falling over. We need to provision more servers. We need to get auto scaling working better. We need to get, the load balancers back in shape. Like that's pretty rare to be our issues these days. These days, our issues are more around, database migrations, which is a world that I think is still in its infancy. scale from an infrastructure standpoint has not been as challenging with this company as I thought. Scaling the rest of the company, scaling the non-engineering side has been incredibly challenging, because that looks more like marketing and PR and sales and is it founder-led sales? Is it like sales-led sales? Is it marketing-led sales? Is it product-led sales? When you're young, it's all of those things. That stuff's been pretty hard, pretty challenging for us. And maybe I'm just standing on Cole's shoulders here actually a little bit, and that he's just done such a great job helping to do the architecture that I don't worry as much about the technical scaling as I used to. But I actually think one of the great things that's happened for startups is that we've gotten a lot of that initial architecture challenge off the table that used to really keep people out. It used to cause the kinds of catastrophic outages that would kill companies early on. And now those happen later. I think, you have to grow pretty significantly before you hit the point where that scale starts to really get in your way. And some SaaS companies, I think, will actually never hit it. User numbers aren't in the billions generally with a B2B SaaS organization, and you've got to get pretty big before you hit the edges of what built-in infrastructure can handle. Or you're trying to do something like mitigate, manage your cost. Then you get into all kinds of challenging scale worlds. We're luckily not in that state.
Well, as you step out on the balcony and you look across all that you've built, what are you most proud of?
This will sound sort of silly and self-serving. I'm really proud of the retention rate of this product. That's such a like product manager kind of an answer. I'm getting a performance cycle review, and I'm proud of it. But I really am. I think when you're a tools builder, you're really close to your customers, especially working at like Facebook on internal tools. You see these people in person every day using your tools, and if they don't like it, you get to see the frowns and the frustration, and people are very open about the things that they dislike. I think I've done some work in the consumer space as well, and the consumer space, you don't actually get to see a lot of the reaction. It's sort of all over the place. It's a little disconnected from you. You're kind of going world scale, and you're not hearing emails back when things go badly. They're just churning. It's kind of a data point. But in SaaS, it's very personal. Especially tooling. It's just a very personal relationship with customers, and they tell you every time they're unhappy. And so when I look at Kintaba, what I'm really happy with is just how successful it's been at getting companies engaged in the process of incident management and keeping them there. Because I think so many companies have tried to do incident management and been unsuccessful. They've gone in, tried to roll it out. A couple people have adopted it. The culture didn't really take hold. The CTO didn't really get in. But I feel like this tool is really doing what we wanted it to do. It's propagating this culture of incident management, not just the tooling. And because of that, I think we're just seeing really interesting growth inside of our customers, like sort of growth across the organization, as well as retention in terms of continuous use of this process that was, pretty new to a lot of customers who brought it on. So I'm really proud of that, and I think there's a big interesting future for incident management, and it only happens if people can not only adopt it but like maintain that day-to-day practice of it. And so I'm really excited to see that happen with this product.
Let's flip the script a little bit. Tell me about a mistake you made and how you and your team responded to it.
Things that we brought with us from our kind of earlier days of running companies and earlier days of working at unicorns like Facebook was sort of a penchant to ship really quickly, right? There's sort of this idea of move fast and break things that's existed, in the startup world for an awfully long time. And it really served the lean startup world well, right? Especially back in like the early 2010s. And in the early days of Kintaba, we brought that with us in a way that I don't think was super great for the company. It let us get features out really fast, but our likelihood to cause breakage in other parts of the product due to rapid shipping were significantly higher than I would have liked them to be. We talk about our own incidents internally, right? Like, how many Sev 1s are we having? We use Kintaba internally. Like, in the early days, they really spiked. And it took us a while to get comfortable with the fact that we needed to move just a little bit slower when we were building and shipping in the early days. Because, again, mapping back to what I'd said earlier, where I said, we wanted people to pay us straight out of the gate. We wanted to see that growth inside of the company straight out of the gate. Like, those two boxes were checked. They aren't super compatible with, and the product becomes fragile, at moments that the customer isn't expecting. And I think our early customers, suffered a little bit with us, more than they probably needed to. Before we realized that there's safer ways to ship. We needed to get our unit tests in order. We needed to get our staging environments in order and properly testing. We needed to get more fallback and resiliency into our code. And I think that it took us a little bit longer than I would have liked to admit that was a problem, not a feature of the company. And I think figuring that out was hugely valuable for us and getting us into sort of a more resilient state, not just from a, base code competency standpoint, but also from like a cross-feature stability standpoint, which is a tough thing to measure when you're rolling out a tool that has a lot of sub-features and a lot of capabilities, which we were shipping quickly. Like, measuring stability across the product. We had luckily like a little intercom widget in the corner where if things went badly, you could really yell directly at the team. You could say, "This isn't working," and we were all on the intercom threads, managing it. But if I look back and I were doing it again, I think I would have put a little bit more attention towards, making sure that the shipping process, the sort of release process, was better managed from day one. How often do we ship? Is it predictable? When do we do the cut? Even things like that, I think could have been pretty easily put together early, but we were really wired to old school lean startup, like ship it, just push the button. And it took us a little bit, I think, to get our heads back in the right spot there to make sure that, we were shipping safely each week, which is about, we sometimes ship more than each week, but these days we ship about once a week, which is where we found the sweet spot.
Well, what does the future look like for the product and for your team?
I think you can look at incident management as a spectrum that could go one of two ways. To the right, you move deeper and deeper into the technical side of things, right? You get closer and closer to SRE. You start to become, a more expansive reporting platform, and technical platform for a smaller group of people in the company. Like, I think that's like one direction it could go. And I actually have seen some competitors kind of move in that space. I won't name names, but I think like that's one version of what incident management becomes. We are wholly involved in the idea that there's a shift left opportunity for incident management, which is moving closer to the customer, and the customer being our customer's customer, right? How do you pull incidents closer and closer to the reporting source, which is oftentimes the customer who tells you when something's going wrong in a way that it's never gone wrong before? And how do you involve more of the organization in the incident process so that they can benefit from it, not just the technical organization? So I get really happy when I have customers come to me and tell me, "Oh, we used incident management the other week for a power outage at an office. Not because it took the site down, but because our employees were at risk and we wanted to make sure they were comfortable, but we're not sure if we can use Kintaba that way." And we'd come back and we'd say, "Of course you could. That's the way you need to use it. Incident management isn't actually a technical practice. It's a human practice." And I think where Kintaba is most successful long term is it becomes a natural tool for the entire organization to use that lives somewhere close to your sort of task and project management space. And just over the line where you say, these aren't planned things, these are unplanned, high importance tasks and actions we need to take to deal with a measurable critical situation. And if you describe it that way, suddenly it's relevant to sales, marketing, PR, legal, C-suite, and engineering. And this is something we saw at Facebook work really well, and that I really want to bring to the rest of the world. And the future for Contaba looks like that to me. It looks like a company-wide tool that's valuable to everyone in the organization, where incidents are being caught earlier and earlier for various types of practices. And it's just bringing resilience to everyone, not just resilience to your technical organization, but resilience to your PR organization, resilience to your sales organization. I don't think that the process steps in incident management are unique to technical folks. And I think that that's the really interesting future that kind of got me into this space in the first place, and that I think remains our North Star.
So John, it sounds like you're doing really interesting and different things. You're taking a different approach into, the sort of industry of incident management, so to speak. I'm curious, what is the community like in that world? How does the community take shape, form, and what does that look like?
So it's a very young and just forming community. In fact, if you stand in front of a room of folks from a company and you say, who here is involved in incident management? I don't think you'll see too many hands go up, right? It's sort of a strange question. It turns out, though, if you ask that same room, who here has ever been a responder to an incident, who here has ever had to deal with a major outage or a fire, suddenly all the hands go up. And so we actually noticed there wasn't really a way for these folks to come together, and we've been looking for ways to build this community and connect these people more successfully. And so we're actually putting a conference together. It's called IRConf, and it's really the first incident responder focused conference. And it's really cool. We're bringing folks in from industry, from companies like Honeycomb, like 1Password, to come in and just talk about, what do you do when things go badly? How do you manage it at your company? We've got talks about it at scale. We've got talks about it from a cultural standpoint. And it's really exciting. It's it's irconf.io. And it's April 1st. It's not an April Fool's Day joke, actually happening. But yeah, we're really still looking for ways to bring that community together and get them connected, because when a space like this is in its infancy, like finding the community and helping people feel like others are going through the same challenges they are is really just critical, right? You want this idea of every company is on fire, not just mine. The more that propagates, I think the more successful we'll all be at dealing with those fires.
Well, let's switch to you, John. Who influences the way that you work? Name a CEO, a CTO, an architect, really any person that you look up to, and why.
I've got some sort of traditional influencers. I mean, going through Y Combinator, folks like Paul Graham, and really the entire Y Combinator founder family, who I stay very connected to, has always been kind of a group of powerful influencers. I think as it ages, people look at Y Combinator in a different light than they used to. But for a long time, it was very much a disruption. It was very much a different attitude. It was the attitude that really anyone can figure out how to build companies, and anyone can come into any space to apply their capabilities, as long as they're intelligent, driven, and have technical capabilities. That was sort of the base, right? You need an engineer. Everything else you can learn. I still really believe that. Coming into incident management, building a B2B SaaS startup like this, to me, felt like a bit of a reach as we started to plan it, and then felt natural afterwards. We said, well, we'll figure it out. We'll meet the right people, we'll build, we'll learn, and hopefully we'll be better for that. CEOs who really influence me, folks like Devin Finzer over at OpenSea, which is a crypto startup, has always been a good friend and pretty influential on me. He ran. People think of crypto and NFTs now as this big, massive successful space, billions of dollars. OpenSea has raised all this money, but we knew them really well back when it was something that no one cared about. Where you would shop the idea of NFTs up and down Sand Hill Road for investment, and everyone would laugh you out the door. But they held on, and they held on really hard. And then they're now getting the spoils of that. And I think that that's incredible, to be a CEO in a space that's unproven, and to just, grip that thing tightly and say, this vision is going to come true. Really, really amazing. And then the third CEO is Guillermo over at Vercel, who's just done a fantastic job of being a community practitioner in a way that I wish I could be. I watch the way that he interacts with his community and has helped to build and grow Next, and ultimately Zeit, which became Vercel. It's just incredible to me as a founder, and has always been a powerful influencer. So those three folks have been sort of influential in my day-to-day over the last decade of my life.
We talked about a mistake earlier, but a little bit different spin. If you could go back to the beginning, what would you do differently? Or where would you consider taking a different approach?
I think if I could give, advice to myself, I guess is sort of what that question is, right? Like back in the early days. I would continue to push really hard on the idea of like avoiding fear. It's really scary running a company. Founders don't get to talk about it much because there's a survivorship bias where no matter how scary it gets, if you're ultimately successful, you forget all the scary stuff, right? It's someone told me when we were having a child, there's a biological imprint on parents where after like the first year, their minds start to erase everything that happened. Because if it didn't do that, people would never have more kids, right? If you didn't forget about all the really hard stuff. But startups, especially if you're new to this space, I don't come from a line of high-tech startup founders, right? I mean, this was a very new space to me. And the idea of bringing on money from other people, potentially losing it, really kept me up at night. Still does keep me up at night. But the really great founders, the really great companies are able to focus on the fact that your goals for what you're building are far more valuable and interesting than the money. And being afraid of the money or being afraid of spending it or being afraid of losing can really paralyze you. I mean, I've seen it in other founders. I've seen it in myself, especially in my first company, in terms of like fear of loss and fear of failure. And so I'd take bigger bets in all cases, and everything I've ever done. I would take the bet that I was making and I would 10x it. I would say, in the early days of building out Caffeinated Mind, which did the high-speed data transport, when we were trying to build into the media industry, I'd say, well, what would it have taken to go and build and become high-speed data transport for 5 industries, not like 1.5. And I try to do that today in terms of incident management, which is, how do we not just be for SRE? How do we be for everyone? And so I would pull that back as far as I could to as early days as I could. And make more and more aggressive actions. Because if it doesn't work, you're better off not working when you're shooting for the highest moon you can find, than you are, falling apart when you never really even took the biggest stab you could have at it.
Well, last question, John. So you're getting on a plane and you're sitting next to a young entrepreneur who's built the next big thing. They're jazzed about it. They can't wait to show it off to the world. They can't wait to show it off to you right there on the plane. What advice do you give that person having gone down this road a bit?
As you come into this space, as you're like entering into it in terms of the thing you've built, bringing it to the world, you need to take it as a given that the way you're going to learn as a builder is by being wrong. And it means that you're going to have to be wrong a lot. And it's okay that the things you're building right now might not hit the way you want them to. What's critical is that you learn from from the bits of success inside of that, and then you find ways to aggressively leverage it, right? That's what you want to do. We talk about how VCs operate, right? They operate in this idea that they make 40 investments and only one needs to work, right? Because if the one works, that outsized success takes everything else down. Founders need to kind of operate the same way. You need to be able to make large numbers of small bets inside of your large vision. And when you find the one that kind of sticks, leverage it to get that 1000x return on it so that your bigger vision actually reaches the goals that you're trying to reach. I meet a lot of founders early on who are overly subscribed to a very discrete part of a larger vision. And because of it, they disappear very quickly They come in, that discrete test doesn't really hit the way they wanted it to, and they say, okay, this large vision is impossible, and they move on, and do something else. They get a job somewhere else. I think that's critical feedback that founders don't often get in the early days. We often get the kind of fail fast idea, but it's very rarely put in the context of you want to fail fast on small things as aggressively as possible. Just make sure you really believe in the big vision that you're trying to work towards so that you can get that, that outsized benefit from when you make it successful. It's kind of a weird way to phrase it, but I think that's sort of the advice I'd want to be given. I think that's what I'd tell another founder as well. That's
great advice. Well, John, thank you for being on the show today. Thank you for telling the creation story of Kintaba.
Great, thanks.
And this concludes another chapter of Code Story. Code Story is hosted and produced by Noah Labhart. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting app of your choice. Support the show on patreon.com/codestory for just $5 to $10 a month. And when you get a chance, leave us a review. Both things help us out tremendously. And thanks again for listening.
Life can be chaotic. If you're running a retail business, don't let disorganized order fulfillment add to the chaos. Use ShipStation instead. With ShipStation, you never have to worry about shipping and fulfillment again. Whether you're running a business out of your garage or you have multiple warehouses, ShipStation is ideal for every phase of your business's growth. Save time with one login for all your stores and by automating repetitive tasks. Plus, you'll save money with the best shipping rates from global carriers. ShipStation's industry-leading features help you deliver a better customer experience. They'll get accurate and faster shipments along with automated tracking updates with your branding. And with up to 88% off UPS and USPS rates and up to 90% off FedEx rates, ShipStation is the fastest and most affordable way to ship. Calm the chaos. Switch to ShipStation today. Start a free trial at shipstation.com/audio. That's shipstation.com/audio.
89% of business leaders say AI is a top priority. The right choice is crucial, which is why teams at 1/3 of Fortune 500 companies use Grammarly. Grammarly is the right AI assistant for your team. With top-tier security credentials and 15 years of experience in responsible AI, Grammarly is how companies like yours increase productivity while keeping data protected and private. See why 70,000 teams trust Grammarly at grammarly.com/enterprise.